For decades, the global standard for air defense was straightforward. If an enemy fires a projectile, you fire a more expensive, more sophisticated missile to destroy it in mid-air. This was the logic of the Cold War and the cornerstone of the modern security architecture. It worked for jets, for cruise missiles, and for high-altitude ballistic threats. But in the skies over Ukraine, that logic fundamentally broke. Iran's signature weapon, the Shahed 136, was designed to do one thing: bankrupt the defender. It is a flying moped, a buzzing low-tech drone built from foam and plywood that costs roughly $35,000 to produce. In the early days of its deployment, defenders were firing $4 million Patriot interceptor missiles to stop them. That is not just a tactical failure, it is an economic death sentence. You cannot defend a country by spending 1,000 times more to stop a drone than your enemy spends to build it. Today, that cost equation has been inverted. Ukraine is no longer just defending itself. It has become the world's leading exporter of drone-on-drone defense. By deploying over 200 specialist teams to Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Jordan, Kiev is rewriting the playbook for modern air defense. But why is this low-tech drone suddenly the greatest threat to Iranian military doctrine? And what happens when the world's most oil-rich nations adopt a strategy forged in the freezing trenches of Eastern Europe? To understand this, we must zoom out. The global air defense system was built for a different age. Traditional systems like THAAD and Patriot are designed for high-value targets, fast-moving, expensive threats. They exist because historically, the cost of an attack was so high that only states could afford it. But Iran's innovation was to democratize destruction. By mass-producing cheap, autonomous one-way attack drones, they created a swarm effect. The strategy is to saturate the airspace, forcing the defender to reveal their radar positions and burn through their finite supply of million-dollar interceptors. If the defender runs out of missiles, the swarm eventually hits its target. This system exists because of the asymmetry of cost. Iran figured out that even if they lose 90% of their drones, the remaining 10% represent a win if they can force the defender to spend $100 million in interceptors to stop a $1 million swarm. It is an attrition tactic meant to degrade critical infrastructure, oil terminals, power grids, and command centers, without ever needing to face a conventional air force. The path to this inversion began in the spring of 2026. As the conflict in the Middle East intensified, Gulf nations found their sophisticated, U.S.-made systems struggling to keep up with persistent, mass drone attacks. They were burning through interceptors faster than they could be replenished, and the cost was becoming unsustainable. At the same time, Ukraine had been fighting under this exact type of pressure for over 4 years. Having absorbed tens of thousands of Shahed-style strikes, Kyiv had moved beyond high-end missiles. They developed a layered architecture: mobile acoustic sensor networks to hear the drones, electronic warfare to blind them, and finally, specialized first-person view interceptor drones to knock them out of the sky. The mechanism is the interceptor drone. Instead of a $4 million missile, Ukraine uses small, agile drones, like the Sting, that cost between $1,000 and $5,000 to produce. These are manually piloted or AI-assisted to physically collide with the incoming Shahed. Because they don't require expensive radar guidance or rocket fuel, they can be deployed in massive, dispersed numbers. By creating a grid of mobile fire groups, pickup trucks mounted with sensors, and cheap interceptors, Ukraine turned its entire territory into a defensive wall that is too cheap to exhaust. The consequences of this shift are tectonic. For governments, it means the end of total reliance on expensive foreign platforms. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE have recently signed landmark 10-year defense agreements with Ukraine, focused on co-producing these low-cost systems domestically. For corporations, this creates a new massive market for AI-guided interceptor drones and decentralized sensor networks. For the ordinary person, the outcome is a fundamental shift in how national security is defined. Security is no longer a matter of buying the most expensive hardware. It is about scaling local production and modular technology to counter decentralized threats. A common misunderstanding is that this new defense architecture replaces conventional systems like Patriot. It does not. Instead, it creates a tiered reality. High-end missiles are still necessary for ballistic missiles and jet aircraft. But by delegating the Shahed problem to $2,500 interceptors, countries can save their expensive, finite missiles for the threats that actually require them. Most people get this wrong because they view war through the lens of a silver bullet, one weapon that does everything. In reality, the future of air defense is poly-layered, a mix of sensors, jammers, interceptor drones, and conventional missiles working together in a unified network. What happens next will be defined by two scenarios. First, the Gulf Shield scenario. If these Ukrainian-modeled defenses are successfully deployed across the Middle East, Iran's swarming doctrine will effectively become obsolete. The cost asymmetry will flip, and Iran will be forced to either drastically increase its drone production at a time when its own industrial capacity is under extreme pressure from the ongoing war, or abandon the strategy entirely. Second, the technological arms race scenario. Iran has already begun upgrading its drones with advanced guidance and black airframes to evade detection. If the Gulf states continue to integrate Ukrainian systems, we can expect Iran to respond with swarm AI, where their drones communicate with each other to dodge the interceptors in real time. We are left with a reflection on the nature of innovation in warfare. Often we assume that superiority comes from the top down, from the richest nations with the biggest budgets. But Ukraine has shown us that necessity, under extreme fire, is a far more efficient incubator for innovation. They have taken the cheap, disposable, and mass-produced philosophy of the Shahed and used it to build a mirror-image shield. The question that lingers is this: if a $2,500 drone can neutralize a $35,000 weapon, what happens to the multi-billion-dollar military-industrial complexes that were built on the assumption that defense would always be the most expensive part of the equation? Does the future of security lie in the hands of global superpowers, or with the scrappy, decentralized innovation of those who have been forced to fight for their survival? Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is that we have entered an era where the most effective way to stop a billion-dollar war is not with a bigger bomb, but with a swarm of cheap, disposable ones. The monopoly on high-end defense is over, and the era of the low-tech counteroffensive has only just begun. As these technologies proliferate, the geopolitical influence of those who control the skies will be reshaped not by the sophistication of their aircraft, but by the efficiency of their math. And that math now points directly toward the end of the high-cost interceptor era.